As the Taliban return to power in Afghanistan like never before, Iran adapts its stance by accepting them, but with a mindful eye. Iran's approach towards Afghanistan's turmoil will be our study of the day. Recent developments in Afghanistan have emerged over a mosaic social and political infrastructure. Before anything, Iran calls for inter-Afghan relations and participation by all political factions, all building tiles, in solving their country's many problems. But where called upon, this country will help. The question is how. For more, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. How and in what capacity, actually? For some, help means taking up arms or sending in military consultants. And those skeptical of the Taliban ask why Iran is not taking action against the Taliban, because the Taliban threatened to attack Iran up to 20 years ago. Iran, they say, was the most advanced regional force in destroying Daesh. So how did it not take action against the Taliban, as though the life of the people of Afghanistan is less worthy than the lives of the people of Iraq and Syria? Mr. Zohrevand was ambassador to Afghanistan and Italy. He visited Press TV studios to give us a concise, comprehensive interview. Some point to Iran's presence in Syria and Iraq and say, why not Afghanistan? Well, the thing is, the Afghan government hasn't asked for our presence, right? I mean, if we just turn up there, we are acting like Americans.
The nature of our presence in Iraq and Syria is such that the governments of those countries saw some alignment in the threats and opportunities for themselves and us. And that's why we went there, by governmental demand. The result was also positive, meaning that if any of the countries were left alone, maybe the political maps would have had to be redrawn. Our stance regarding Iraq has been different. The former Afghan government never asked us for assistance or cooperation. That's why we maintained the same relations with Afghanistan as we did with some of our neighbors.
In recent years, Iran has not provided arms or financial assistance to the parties involved in Afghanistan so as not to be accused of defending one side. Indeed, Iran tends not to enter militarily or send consultants into a country without the request of the legitimate government of that country. And so, according to this strategy, it will not enter Afghanistan at this stage either. On July the 7th, Iran hosted talks between Taliban and Afghan government representatives in its capital city, Tehran. The Rouhani foreign minister, Javad Zarif, used the meeting to celebrate the U.S. departure from Afghanistan, whilst warning that continuing clashes between Taliban fighters and the Afghan government would be costly. The U.S. military exit from Afghanistan was due to be completed by August the 31st, which is now to be extended. In the meantime, Iranian policymakers are strategizing about their future approach toward Afghanistan. This is a far cry from how things were 20 years ago and more. The attack on the Iranian consulate by the Taliban and the killing of Iranian diplomats was the culmination of hostilities at the time. The Taliban claimed that this was the case. Iran defended its anti-Taliban actions at the time, but even then refused to enter the country. Maulavi Khairullah, a Taliban political office member, did a face-to-face with Press TV. Here's a little of what he said.
دویم دا چې لکه ما مخې چې ویل چې موږ ډېر مشترکات لرو موږ په دې خطه کې سره ګډ یو په دې اسیا کې ټول اوسېږو که د حکومتونه بدلیږي د اقوام نه بدلیږي د دې ضرورتونه دي دا ټول اسب بزیره دي د خارجي قوا او د خارجي استعماري قوتونو څخه هغوی باید خپل د ژوند چارو کې باید بهبود راولي یو د بله باید هغوی سره چې کوم ځای کې دي
Mr. Zareh is an analyst and former diplomat who draws on background in looking at matters current. Let's hear him out.
ما بر اساس We reached an agreement based on old agreements, which could go back 100 years, over the Helmand River waters. But we haven't been able to use the water for the past 20 years. This has had a negative impact on the economy of Sistan and Balochistan and South Khorasan provinces. To solve the issue, we need to engage in negotiations. There are other instances, like economic ties. We have $3.6 billion worth of currency transactions with Afghanistan. This can reach a $10 billion mark in a couple of years, which would both benefit the people of Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Iran first needs security in Afghanistan, and it hopes for the peaceful means to this. That's all Afghan factions reaching an understanding among themselves. On Sunday, August the 15th, after Kabul was taken by the Taliban, the then Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif welcomed the formation of a coordination council. That's remembered as Iran's first major reaction. We hope that it can lead to dialogue and a peaceful transition in Afghanistan, Zarif tweeted, as violence, war and occupation never solve problems. The slightest insecurity equals the Afghans rushing to Iran. In fact, Iran suffers the most from any insecurity in Afghanistan compared to other countries. How do you evaluate Iran's stance toward Afghanistan? Has it jumped ship, or is it naturally acting in favor of its own national interests?
Today, as the developments in Afghanistan show that the former government is gone and that the Taliban is taking over the country, we will continue to use our 20-year-long relations with the Taliban to stabilize the security and political situation of Afghanistan. This is both to the benefit of the Afghan nation and in line with the national interests of Iran.
The Taliban have their own incentives for relations with Iran. They would not want to risk alienating this country. In short, conflict with Iran is bad for business. The Iran-Afghanistan border includes several lucrative trade routes. And beyond differences, both Iran and the Taliban share an ideological antipathy towards the United States and the West, largely speaking.
دا د افغانانو په خیر ده، د امریکایانو په خیر ده. شل کاله جنگ وسو، په شل کاله کې یو نیم لک خارجي قوتونه رااله. افغانستان کې دي خلک روزلي و. په افغانستان کې نه امنیت راوستلی سو او نه هم داسې وکړو چې د امارت په وړاندې به هغوی کوم تقدم پیدا کړی سو. جنگ دی بغیر د دې نه چې خساره وشي دواړو طرفو ته هیچ فایده پر مرتبه نشد. کسی که به خانه جگر داخل میشه صاحب خانه میجنگه تا که زنده باشه، چلا که بیگانه به خانهش آمده. اگر باز میگردن همون مسئله همون سیناریویی که 20 سال گذشت همون تکرار میشه.
For Iran, the benefits of a good Tehran-New Taliban ties are less obvious. Iran did also have excellent contacts and significant influence, however, with Afghanistan's Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani governments.
Yes, some people are asking in Iran why we didn't strongly support the democratic government of former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. They demand that we endanger the status of the Islamic Republic to throw our weight behind a government that doesn't have any roots, powers, legitimacy, or popularity. It was called a democratic government, but I don't know how it could be regarded as such. Only 1.8 million people participated in the Afghan elections 2 years ago. This is while over 20 million voters have been eligible to cast their ballots in the 40 million strong nation. What type of democracy is that? And this so-called democratic government never showed any cooperation with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Over the past few years, they have been ignoring our rights to the Helmand River.
Looking at the Taliban's recent promises and governing doctrine, the group has rationalized with experience gained over the years. But its past does echo a cautionary tale. Thousands of Afghans are already heading to Iran for fear of a radical interpretation of Islam. For Iran's part, I asked if the Taliban, after convincing all sides of its inclusiveness and peaceful intentions, might not get ideas about reviving a greater Khorasan or sowing discord between Iran's southeastern Sistan-Baluchistan province and the rest of the country.
Well, when considering foreign policy, the future can't be foretold. Our situation with the Taliban is such that we have had relations and agreements. The Taliban maintain that they remain committed to their obligations and are carrying them out. For example, the Helmand River is now flowing inside Sistan and Baluchistan plains. They are saying they are committed. Therefore, there is no indication that the Taliban will turn into a security issue in the future. Hypothetically, if this is the case, we'll decide our next steps then. We are not a weak country. We can repel any aggression.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. Plenty more to be said, but first a quick media review with Sarah on Afghan refugees to Iran, past and potential, and on what's positive about the US withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Hello and welcome to another edition with me, Sarah Adema. Today we will look into some reviews regarding the Taliban's return to power and Iran's say in this matter. Our first piece of news comes from the Middle East Eye that begins with the headline, Afghanistan says Iranians look on with apprehension at crisis next door. Ever since the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan 42 years ago, Iranians have been living alongside Afghan refugees and immigrants, and many in the country see the fall of Kabul as yet another dark chapter in the neighboring country's contemporary history. But the recent crisis in Afghanistan has brought a renewed debate in Iran. Should the country keep its doors closed to refugees amid its fifth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic and an economy strained by years of US sanctions, or should solidarity prevail? After the monarchy collapsed in Iran, which was replaced by an Islamic republic, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered the opening of the borders of Afghan refugees. While many Afghans initially landed in Iran's eastern provinces near the border, many went on to settle across the country. However, not all Iranians share the same sentiment about a potential influx of new Afghan refugees, especially those who live in regions already home to many of the country's 3 million Afghan residents. Moving on to the next review that comes from the Organization for World Peace, it reads, Iran says US defeat in Afghanistan offers chance for peace. Iran State TV quoted President Ebrahim Raisi as saying, America's military defeat and its withdrawal must become an opportunity to restore life, security, and durable peace in Afghanistan. He continued, Iran backs efforts to restore stability in Afghanistan, and as a neighboring and brother nation, Iran invites all groups in Afghanistan to reach a national agreement. Barring intervention, Afghanistan is poised to collapse under the wheel of Taliban rule or erupt into a violent civil war. Neither outcome bodes well for Afghanistan's neighbors nor Afghan civilians. It is incumbent upon Iran and Pakistan, two nations with significant investment in the stability of Afghanistan, to exert their influence and immediately initiate and facilitate peace talks between the Taliban and Afghanistan's remaining government. Both Iran and Pakistan have expressed that a power-sharing agreement is their ideal outcome for Afghanistan's future. Additionally, international organizations including the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations and the United Nations need to closely monitor Afghanistan for human rights abuses during these uncertain transitions. Our final review from Tehran Times says, refugees seek asylum in Iran as Taliban takes over in Afghanistan. As former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled his country and ceded power to the Taliban, Iran's eastern borders have seen an unabated influx of Afghans who seek a new life in Iran. Some used to be wealthy businessmen who have lost their positions in the conflict, and others are simply concerned about the future of their children. But all wind up here in this camp, where they have to wait for a decision by Iranian authorities whether to let them in or send them back to their country. Iran's border police have set up makeshift camps alongside the country's eastern border with Afghanistan to temporarily accommodate the inbound refugees. The Milak crossing point in Sistan-Baluchistan province is one of the border crossings that has been the entry of more than 600 Afghans every day since the Taliban began advancing in Afghanistan. The Iranian armed forces say they have received incoming Afghans with open arms, providing them with all the relief items such as masks, disinfectants, food, and medicine. That's it for me in today's edition. I'll see you next time, and now back to you, Leila.
The return of Afghan immigrants to their country is economically beneficial for Iran and even Afghanistan. These immigrants have been working and studying in this country for many years and are considered skilled workers now, beneficial for Afghanistan. And as for Iran, this country could lighten its population load, given its gasping economy further strangulated by US sanctions and the corona pandemic. The pressure on healthcare, education and subsidies is paramount. Afghan security is of paramount importance to Iran. How does this affect Iran's stance to inter-Afghan relations and all Afghan factions governing their country, deciding for their country and solving its problems?
Our relationship with Afghanistan can impact our security. One example is the issue of immigrants. Others are drug-related problems and the presence of takfiri terrorists like Daesh and Al-Qaeda that have been affecting the world. The other issue is that every time Afghanistan is hit with a crisis, we'll see a rise in the numbers of asylum seekers. Our economic ties with Afghanistan have been affected. The Central Asian country imports 90% of the goods it needs. At the moment when unemployment is rampant and concerns are heightened, the economy is stalled. This has impacted Afghanistan's imports from Iran. These lead us to stay sensitive about the developments in the country.
Altogether, over 3 million Afghans are known to be living in Iran. According to government figures given in October 2020, on which consultations are ongoing, 800,000 refugees live in Iran. That is 780,000 Afghans and 20,000 Iraqis. But some 2 million undocumented Afghans and nearly 600,000 Afghan passport holders also live in Iran, with Iranian visas. Iran wants the withdrawal of extra-regional forces from Afghanistan because it believes that their presence is equal to the destruction of security.
The
Americans had come to stay for at least 70 to 80 years. But why are they leaving now? Because they suffered a huge defeat. The Americans claim to have spent $2 trillion in the war, and at least 6,000 American soldiers were killed in the country, and the death toll was steadily rising. On the other hand, they did not create any logical rationale that would justify their stay for the world, so they withdrew with shame. What you refer to as the problem in Afghanistan wasn't caused by the US withdrawal in the past 2 weeks. It was created by the US military deployment to Afghanistan.
The problem is that after 20 years, the United States failed to achieve its goal of eliminating the Taliban. In practice, the Taliban were able to establish themselves as an ethnic and religious force to the extent that they effectively challenged the power of the central government and brought international powers to the negotiating table. Knowing this and seeing the US defeat at the hands of indigenous Taliban forces, Iran decided to encourage inter-Afghan talks. In these negotiations, the Taliban agreed to recognize the rights of all ethnic and religious minorities if they won. It was the dissatisfaction of the Afghan people with the corruption and inefficiency of the US-backed government that reduced their interest in the central government to almost zero. Corruption and so lack of development. Perhaps this was the reason for the Taliban's advancing into all districts almost uncontested.
The rapid advancements of the Taliban, which astonished the international community, including its neighbors, called for us to monitor the situation more closely. What is important for us is observing the kind of action Afghan society and people will take towards this development and how they will adapt themselves to it. As a country that has always stood by the Afghan people, we are monitoring the developments and the type of interaction of the Taliban with the people of Afghanistan and the structure that they are set to present in the political system of the country and see how the people will cooperate with them.
The central government of Afghanistan, with its catastrophic defeat, showed that 20 years of US presence in the country had not been to build a strong system. The goal of the United States was simply to have a military presence in the country and perhaps to prevent it from becoming secure. Please comment on the necessity of American troops' withdrawal from Afghanistan given their corruptive nature, their corruptive influence.
اینا روز اول گفتن ما میرویم که در افغانستان دولت و ملت.
On the first day, the Americans claimed that they were going to build a government and a nation in Afghanistan. Today, they say that their goal wasn't nation building. It's in stark contrast to their position 20 years ago. They killed bin Laden. What else would have justified their presence there? That's why they're not telling the facts. The other point is that the Afghan army, which received $88 billion of US assistance, was so disorganized that the replacement of a few commanders led to its dissolution. This shows the Americans haven't even been successful in army building. Their withdrawal was similarly irresponsible. They could have devised a better plan for that and asked assistance from the neighboring countries to help with the power vacuum following their withdrawal. But that didn't happen.
UNHCR, the UN agency, for its part urged the international community to step up immediate and sustained support to both Afghanistan and its neighbors in a spirit of responsibility and burden sharing. But it also appealed to the Iranian government to continue its tradition of hospitality in hosting Afghans fleeing conflicts and violence for over 40 years. To round up, whoever of the Afghans gets a majority vote, Iran, based on previous experiences, will, as it has done so far, call for the security of Afghanistan. Iran's anti-Taliban approach in the past was due to their threats against Iran. In fact, Iran has repeatedly warned that it will respond to any action against its interests. The Taliban have sought to accommodate Iran also to expand their portfolio of diplomatic support beyond Pakistan. Last year, they appointed a Shia cleric from the Hazara community as a district governor in northern Afghanistan. The group have regularly condemned attacks on Shia mosques and districts of Afghanistan, presumably being carried out by the local branch of the terror group Daesh, known as ISIS in the world of the West. Daesh is hostile to both Iran and the Taliban. Most recently, the Taliban forcefully denied any link to a horrific attack on a girls' school in western Kabul, in a mostly Shia district. They also allowed Shias to commemorate Ashura in Mazar-e-Sharif. Ashura is the day the Shia leader Imam Hussein, peace be upon him, was martyred. Its anniversary was commemorated on the weekend just past. Sohail Shaheen is a Taliban spokesman. He says how the situation of women and girls should look under the Taliban.
The girls are going to their schools. There is no hurdle, and they are going to the schools. The teacher, female teacher, they have resumed their jobs. So we have no problem of women having access to education and to work. But only the Islamic hijab they observe. I think there is no question about women's rights, because we are giving rights to women, to all women. But only it is about hijab. The Western countries say, and this is part of their culture, that women can receive education without hijab. But we as Islamic society and Muslim, we say women can receive or can have access to education with hijab.
Mr. Zarei says of the composition of Afghanistan,
from a religious standpoint, Afghanistan has a homogeneous nation, but from an ethnic point of view, it is not. The defining factor for the Taliban is their ethnicity rather than their faith. The Taliban are mostly representing Pashtuns in Afghan society. Therefore, a stable government can be formed in a country without proper regard for the other ethnicities sharing the power. Ethnic tensions have been the cause of the conflict over the past 30 years since the Soviet occupation of the country ended. There have been no religious tensions, no tensions between Shias and Sunnis. If the Taliban want to establish a stable government in Afghanistan, they can do so without giving real shares to other ethnicities.
Ultimately, Iran is trying to respect the rights of different minorities as much as possible and to have a share in the power structure for each. Also, by proposing negotiations between the various groups, it is trying to encourage them to reach a peaceful agreement so that we do not see war and conflict in this country again. That's it for today. I thank you for watching from the whole team, while missing one of our great analysts whom we could really do with. given profound power fluctuations going on in the region. Sadly, we were deprived of this due to his untimely demise this weekend gone past. Mahan Abedin was pro-establishment, but unbiased and balanced in departing his extensive knowledge and offering analyses of current affairs. He was a product of Iran and the UK, on which he wrote, catching its news in the nick of time and making political predictions that materialized. Rest in peace, colleague friend. In life, honest, generous and dependable. Press TV cannot help but mourn. Bye all, till next week.